Imagine two of the greatest warriors in human history. One raised in the cold castles of England. One born in the dusty plains of the Middle East. One fought for God and glory. One fought for faith and his people. Both were unstoppable. Both were feared by everyone around them. And yet, at the moment, one of them was completely helpless. The other sent him a gift. Not soldiers, not an assassin in the night. A gift. Fruit, ice, and a horse. This is not the story of a war. This is the story of two men who became the greatest rivals history has ever seen, and somehow ended up respecting each other more than anyone else alive. This is Richard the Lionheart versus Saladin. And nothing about this story is what you expect. To understand this story, you have to understand what Jerusalem meant, not just as a city, but as an idea. For Christians, Jerusalem was the holiest place on earth, the city where Jesus walked, where he was crucified, where everything their faith was built on happened. For Muslims, Jerusalem was the third holiest city in all of Islam, the place where Prophet Muhammad made his night journey to the heavens, a city they called Al-Quds, the holy. For hundreds of years, these two worlds have been circling each other. Then in 1095, Pope Urban II stood before a crowd in France and said three words that changed history forever. God wills it. He was calling for a crusade, a holy war to take Jerusalem from Muslim control. What happened next was extraordinary. Hundreds of thousands of people, knights, peasants, priests, kings, left everything they had, their homes, their families, their entire lives, and marched thousands of miles, pour un possible terrain, because they believed God wanted them to. In 1099, after years of brutal warfare, the Crusaders took Jerusalem, and what they did when they entered the city, historians still struggle to write about. The massacre was total. Muslim, Jewish, even some Christian. The streets of Jerusalem ran with blood. One chronicler wrote that horses waded through blood up to their knees. This was the world Saladin was born into. Saladin was not born into power. He was not a prince, not a king, not even from a famous family. He was born in 1137 in Tikrit, a city in modern-day Iraq. His father was a military officer. His family, Kurdish. From the beginning, Saladin was different. While other boys dreamed of wealth and glory, Saladin studied religion, strategy, leadership. He believed deeply and completely that Jerusalem needed to return to Muslim hands, not for revenge, not for politics, but because he believed it was sacred, and it had been taken with rivers of blood. He rose through the ranks slowly, serving under powerful generals, learning everything, watching, waiting, then through a series of political moves that shocked everyone around him. Saladin became the Sultan of Egypt, then Syria. Then he united the fractured Muslim world under one banner, something nobody had managed in decades. His generals thought he was moving too fast. His enemies thought he was bluffing. He was doing neither. Saladin had one goal, one singular obsession, retake Jerusalem, and he was building everything, every alliance, every army, every resource, toward that single moment. In 1187, the moment came. The Crusader kingdom had been weakened by internal fighting, bad leadership, arrogant decisions. Saladin saw the opening. He lured the Crusader army into the desert, away from water sources. In the heat of July, what happened next was one of the most devastating defeats in Crusader history. The Battle of Hattin. The Crusaders were completely surrounded, thirsty, exhausted, burning in desert heat. Saladin had cut off every escape route. When the battle ended, the most powerful Crusader army in the Holy Land was destroyed, their king captured, their greatest relic, the true cross, taken. And 3 months later, Saladin walked into Jerusalem. But here is what made Saladin different from every conqueror before him. He did not massacre the city. He did not take revenge for 1099. He allowed Christians to leave safely. He paid ransoms for the poor himself. He let priests take their holy items. The Muslim world was shocked by his mercy. The Christian world was quietly stunned. This was the man Richard the Lionheart was sailing across the Mediterranean to fight. Richard I of England, born 1157, third son of King Henry II. From childhood, Richard was built for war. 6 feet 5 inches tall, in an era when the average man stood 5'7", physically intimidating, strategically brilliant, completely fearless. He had been fighting since he was 16 years old, putting down rebellions in his own father's kingdom. By the time he became King of England in 1189, Richard had fought more battles than most generals see in a lifetime. But England barely interested him. He spent less than 6 months of his entire reign actually living in England. He saw himself as something bigger than a king. He saw himself as a warrior of God. When news reached Europe that Saladin had taken Jerusalem, Richard did not hesitate. He sold everything: royal lands, castles, government positions. He reportedly said he would have sold London itself if he could find a buyer, all to fund one thing: the Third Crusade. He gathered the largest, best equipped crusader army ever assembled. Knights from England, France, Germany, Italy, ships, siege weapons, cavalry, infantry, everything that European military power could produce in the 12th century. Richard had it, and in 1190, he set sail for the Holy Land. Saladin received the news calmly. He had fought crusaders before. He had beaten them before. But his advisors who had seen Richard fight told him something different this time. They told him, this one is not like the others. And Saladin, for the first time in years, began to prepare differently, because somewhere across the Mediterranean, a ship was cut through the waves, and on that ship stood a king who had never, not once, lost a battle he actually fought. The collision was coming, and the entire medieval world was about to hold its breath when Richard's fleet appeared on the horizon outside Acre. The city felt it before they saw it. The sound came first: hundreds of ships cutting through water. Drums, trumpets, the clinking of 10,000 suits of armor. Saladin's garrison inside the city walls had been holding against a crusader siege for months. They were exhausted, running low on food, barely surviving. Then Richard arrived, and everything changed. Richard did not wait. He did not set up camp and plan for weeks. He looked at the siege, assessed it in hours, and immediately began reorganizing everything. Crusader forces that had been disorganized and ineffective suddenly had direction. Engineers moved into position. Catapults were repositioned. Supply lines reorganized. Soldiers who had been sitting idle for months suddenly had orders. Within days of Richard's arrival, the entire nature of the siege changed. Saladin watched from the hills surrounding Acre. He sent wave after wave of attacks to relieve the city. Richard held the siege and defended against the relief attacks simultaneously, doing two things at once, both perfectly. On July 12, 1191, just weeks after Richard arrived, Acre surrendered. The city that had resisted for so long fell almost immediately once Richard was there. Saladin received the news in silence. His advisors waited for his reaction. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said simply, "This man is dangerous." But what happened after Acre shocked even Richard's own allies. During the surrender negotiations, there was a disagreement over the terms: ransoms, prisoners, timing of payments. Richard, known for his temper, made a decision that historians still debate today. He ordered the execution of nearly 3,000 Muslim prisoners outside the walls of Acre. He had chosen the timing carefully. He had chosen the composition of his forces carefully. The attack began with everything he had: heavy cavalry on the flanks, horse archers in the center, infantry pushing from the rear. The noise alone was designed to terrify. Saladin's forces used drums, massive war drums, and instruments that created a wall of sound. Across the battlefield, the Crusader formation shook but held. Richard rode up and down his own lines, physically stopping knights from charging. His greatest fear was a premature charge that would break the formation before the right moment. Hold, hold, hold. Then the Hospitallers, the military monks, on the rear of the column, could take no more. Two knights broke and charged. Richard saw it. He had two choices: pull them back and watch them die alone, or commit everything, right now, and hope. The timing was close enough. He committed. The signal horns sounded 6 times, and the entire crusader cavalry, thousands of heavily armored knights, turned and charged simultaneously. The impact was catastrophic. Saladin's cavalry, built for mobility and speed, had no answer for a wall of armored horses, hitting them at full gallop. The Muslim lines broke. Not bent, broke. Saladin's army fled the field. Richard had won the most significant open field battle of the entire crusade. Saladin regrouped his forces that night. His commanders expected anger, blame, punishment. Instead, Saladin sat quietly and asked questions. How'd he hold the formation so long? How'd he time the charge so perfectly? How'd he manage discipline under that kind of pressure? He was not angry. He was studying, because Saladin understood something that lesser commanders never learn. Losing a battle tells you more about your enemy than winning one does. After Arsuf, Richard pushed further south. He took the port city of Jaffa, secured his supply lines, began preparing for the final march on Jerusalem. The holy city was now within reach. Saladin knew he could not stop Richard in open battle, so he changed his strategy completely. He began destroying everything around Jerusalem. Wells were poisoned or blocked, crops burnt, village entiers, every resource Richard's army might use, destroyed before they could reach it. If Richard wanted Jerusalem, he would arrive there exhausted, starving, thirsty, with no way to hold it, even if he took it. And then the strangest thing in this entire war happened. Richard fell sick, severely sick, fever, chills, unable to stand without help. His commanders began making quiet preparations for the possibility that he might not survive. Word reached Saladin's camp within hours. His generals came to him with the news and waited for his orders. Attack now. The army is leaderless. This is the moment. Saladin looked at them. Then he sent a message to Richard's camp. Fresh fruit, ice brought down from the mountains of Lebanon, and an offer if Richard needed horses from Saladin's own stables. They were his enemy, sending medicine. Richard's commanders did not know what to do with this. Was it a trick, a show of weakness, a trap? Richard, burning with fever in his tent, understood immediately what it was. It was one warrior, acknowledging another. Nothing more, nothing less. He sent back a message of thanks. And for a brief, strange moment, in the middle of a war that had already killed tens of thousands of people, two of the greatest commanders in history were simply two men, acknowledging each other across the desert. Richard recovered, and the war was not over. The hardest moments were still ahead. Jerusalem was still in Saladin's hands, and Richard was about to make the most painful decision of his entire life. Richard recovered, but the army he returned to was not the same army that had won at Arsuf. Months in the desert had broken something that victory could not fix. Men were dying not from swords, but from disease, exhaustion, despair. Knights who had sold everything in Europe to come here were now questioning everything. Richard pushed them forward anyway. The army marched to within sight of Jerusalem. They could see the walls, the towers, the golden light reflecting off the dome of the rock. Soldiers who had marched for months, through desert heat and constant attack, fell to their knees and wept. They were so close. But Richard did not order the attack. He rode to a hill overlooking the city, alone, and looked at Jerusalem for a long time. Then he raised his shield in front of his face, because he could not bear to look at the city. He knew he could not keep. His own commanders were confused. His soldiers were furious. But Richard understood the mathematics of war better than anyone around him. Even if they took Jerusalem, they could not hold it. His army was too depleted. Europe was too far away, and the moment he left to return to England, Saladin would take it back within months. A victory that lasted 6 months was not a victory. It was a tragedy with extra steps. He made the hardest decision of his life. He turned the army around. What followed was months of smaller battles, negotiations, raids, counterattacks. Saladin retook Jaffa. Richard took it back in one of the most dramatic single battles of the entire war, arriving by boat with a tiny force and personally leading the charge from the water. Even Saladin's commanders admitted they had never seen a king fight like that. Saladin himself rode close enough to watch, and when Richard's horse was killed beneath him, Saladin sent 2 replacement horses directly onto the battlefield to his enemy in the middle of a battle because he refused to let a warrior like Richard fight on foot. In September 1192,